So welcome back, everybody, to another Expert Insight series presented by your Cisco Observability team. And we are here again to talk about more integrations. How can you expand the features and functionalities of AppDynamics? It is a product that has been out for a long time. It's only getting bigger and better now under the Splunk flag. Today, we're going to focus in around the alert and response functionalities that you can expand with the product. And I am your host, Christopher Bonanno, and very happy to present with our expert speaker today, Bill Harper. He is the most qualified person to talk to you about this. He has been in the front lines as a pioneer on the Cisco side, building these integrations within the product, as well working with customers as a customer success specialist to make sure that their shop is set up with their incident management tools, etc. So I'm quite excited to go over this today. But before we do, let's go ahead and go over a couple housekeeping items. So first of all of this content is created for and by Cisco and meant for Splunk AppDynamics customers. But whether you're a customer or somebody that is wanting to improve your use of the product, we are here for you. We have all of the recordings of these Expert Insight series over on our YouTube page, which we will give you the link to later on in the session. And then we just want to kind of open up with, there's going to be a couple assumptions applied to today's presentation. We are going to assume you know what Splunk AppDynamics is, first of all, and that you have a decent idea of how the alert and response model works. Bill will walk you through it briefly, going into how to expand the features there and integrations with various products like PagerDuty. But to keep the flow going and so that it's not too cumbersome for them, we're going to keep everybody on mute. However, we do want to hear any feedback. We want to hear any sort of questions that you guys have. So if you do have any, please drop them in the Q&A or the chat. The Q&A is going to be really good for everybody to see what questions you have, so that they might, if they have the same question, they can just quickly look and say, oh, okay, someone already asked, this is the answer. Versus if you have something to say in the chat where, hey, I can't hear, it's a little low, it's kind of blurry, any sort of feedback where you need us to adjust something for you or real-time feedback, throw that in the chat. But without further ado, I want to hand it off to Bill. Take us away.
Thanks for that introduction, Chris. I really appreciate that. Let's head on over to the agenda. This is what we're going to cover today. We're going to do kind of a broad brush overview on this topic of integrations and using the alerting and response model when we're building those integrations. We're going to do a deep dive on the templating variables. These are the things that allow partners and customers to create custom payloads when they're doing these integrations to third-party systems, or maybe it's just out to an email. We're going to next do some examples. So we'll go into some really basic examples using email and webhook and looking at how you take those templating variables and how they actually get rendered on the other side and the values that are placed in them. We're going to do some application examples as well. This will be PagerDuty and Slack. And then we're going to do a demo, and we're going to demo PagerDuty and Slack and also the email to show you how these things actually get rendered real time. So let's head on into the next slide and go ahead and start the overview. So alerting integrations. The AppDynamics platform provides integration capabilities using webhooks driven by health rules and policies. These integrations are typically built by downstream partners, including partners that build ticketing systems, event correlation, platforms, or chatbots. The integrations are typically built by the ISV partner leveraging the AppDynamics custom webhooks using these templating variables that we're going to deep dive on. And there's a lot of partners out there that have built these. You see on the right-hand side, they're kind of a word maze of some of the integrations that are out there that were built by some of our partners. Custom alerts using templating variables. On the right-hand side there is just, like Chris said, we're going to review sort of how the alerting and response model works in AppDynamics. And that's a diagram that shows performance metric. The performance metric starts to violate. Policy triggers an action, which we refer to those as alerts. In AppDynamics, they're called actions. And the alerts can be sent out via a webhook or out via email. The Velocity engine in AppDynamics allows you to customize the payload using templating variables. So the templating variables are built upon this technology called Velocity. There are other actions that can be triggered in this example, but we're focused here on, webhook and email alerts using these templating variables. Here's another diagram, comes out of our documentation, and we really kind of refer to this when you're sending out alerts to a ticketing system or an email, or, maybe it's a Slack, chat bot or whatever. We refer to this as proactive monitoring. And again, to review this, on the left there, you have some sort of performance metric. It can come from any part of the product, from the APM side, from the mobile side, from the BRUM side, or server or database side. Once that performance metric starts to violate its health rule, it can then trigger a policy. And we'll walk through setting up and showing you guys how these policies work. And the policy can be connected to an action. And the two that we're going to focus in on based on this slide here are notifications, which are email, and HTTP request templates, which are webhooks. So let's jump into the next slide here. AppDynamics uses velocity to surface the alerting data into variables. Velocity is a Java-based templating engine which permits anyone to use a simple yet powerful templating language to refer to objects in the Java code. And we're going to, like I said, do a deep dive on these templating variables so you understand exactly how they work. AppDynamics uses predefined variables that can be used in an HTTP request or in an email to derive value for the customer. These can all be customized, and we're happy to share examples with you towards the end of the presentation. The policy engine substitutes the value of the variable in context to the triggering event or alert when it actually sends the webhook or email out. Velocity can do a lot more than just pass data in template. And if you want to learn more about Velocity, there's a link down there below to the Velocity website. And we'll talk a little bit about things beyond Velocity when we start reviewing some of the templates in the demo. So let's jump into templating variables. So how do templating variables work? They have a concept of a base name with a description and an info class. Templating variables are based on Apache Velocity, and I said that in the last slide. And depending on where you are in the product, the variables will get rendered very differently. If you're in the database side of the product, it's going to be more oriented towards database alerts and database, messages. If you're in the APM part of the product, it's going to be more oriented towards an application view. If you're in the infrastructure, the server view, it'll be oriented towards that. All variables start with a base name followed by one or two info classes, 0, 1, or 2 info classes, excuse me. And here's the format of what these variables look like. $, open curly brace, base name dot info class 1 dot info class 2, close curly brace. So that is the format that they're in. And I'm just going to start with some really simple examples here, and then we'll actually get into the definition, show you all the base names, show you all the info classes, and we'll continue to put examples out there as we go through this so that it does make sense and you guys can, better understand this. So the first example there, account.name. So that's the account name in AppDynamics. The next example, latest event.summary message. This is the summary message of the current event that's violating. Latest event base name is one of the more popular base names used in alerts, so we'll sort of focus in on that. Some of the other ones are useful as well. The next one is controller URL. This one has 0 info classes. It's just a string, and we'll see it on the next page when we get there, but it's no info classes at all. It's just a string, and you can just, say $, open curly brace, controller URL, close curly brace, and boom, you get the URL of your controller. Again, here's another one, latest event.severity. This gives you the severity of the violation that occurred. It's going to either be info, warning, or error. And just a note, AppDynamics has 3 levels of severity, and that's what they are, is info, warning, or error. So let's take a look. This is a bit of an eye chart. And this is all in our documentation. So Chris, I don't know if you want to drop that link to this in there or you want to wait till the end, but it's good to have a nice pointer to where this stuff is defined. If we look down the list there, you can see I'm going to go to the third one down, account. This is one we did before. So you can do account, in the info class of account is entity info. The latest event base name, the info class is event info. And so as you go down this list, you can kind of see that some of these, if we go all the way to the bottom, that's the controller URL with just a string. Like I said, 0 info classes. The one above it is the same way. It's just, 0 info classes. The third one from the bottom there, policy. Policy is of type info class policy info. And let's go back up to the account and run through some examples again. $, open curly bracket, account.name. Again, that's just going to be the account name of your AppDynamics environment. Latest event.summary message. We showed this one on the last slide. This is going to be the summary message of the current violation that's happening. And then severity, latest event.severity is going to be the severity of that event that's occurring. So base names, we have a lot of them here. Like I said, the most useful ones are for alerting would be latest event, action, policy, top severity. Some of the other ones in the middle aren't as widely used from my perspective, but they're still there if you want to, use them. So let's get into some of the info classes. This is the info class called event info. And this is one that was connected to latest event. And the one thing I want to point out here is you can see what I have circled there, entity info application. So that this info class actually has another info class for certain variables in there. And those are the ones I have the square around. So application is of type entity info. And it's going to be things like name and ID, and there's a string in there. And the same with tier and node and database. And so if we go to the side there where the examples are, we'll start with a simple one, which is display name, latest event.display name. And then if we go down to some of the more complicated examples, latest event.application.name, latest event.tier.name, latest event.node.name. So there again, these are using two info classes. And you can see there that within this event info class, we are defining other variables that are of entity info class. We go down the list there, we get down to notification severity, latest event.severity, and the last example in there, which is a really good one, which is latest event.deeplink. This is the link to where the violation came from in AppDynamics. That's a real nice one to put in a payload because users can then click on that link and see exactly where that violation occurred within AppDynamics. Going to the next slide here, I've highlighted entity info on this slide, and that was the one we were talking about on the previous slide, but just to kind of relate the two together, you can see here the types of things that are in entity info, which is string, entity type display name, long, which is an ID, and then there's a string called name. So you could have things like we had on the previous slide, latest event.application.name, latest event.node.name, or this could be, latest event.application.id, or latest event.application.entity type display name. So just to show you how these things work, we wanted to put those examples out there. A few other info classes here. There's image info, and there's action info, and there's policy info. So you can see those there. We have one more slide on this stuff, which gets into more info classes. There's policy info, action info, notification severity. If we were going to use the policy info class, the base name would be policy, and then policy is of type policy info. So you can see there, policy.name, policy.id, it could be policy.digest, it could be policy.entity type display name, which is a string. So that's sort of how these templating variables work. They're kind of nested in there, and you have to, point to the right one to get the value out of it. The next one, action info. So this is basically, you can see in there, action info, what action was it, name, is it an ID, trigger time? So probably the thing that's most valuable in there is probably name and trigger time. So that would be like an action that took place within AppDynamics. And then we have notification severity, which, as I said earlier, it could be an info, it could be a warning, it could be an error. And that's kind of it on the templating variables, just to kind of introduce you to the concept of how they work, how they're formatted, what value they provide, and they look kind of, crazy in the format they're in, but what the real power is when they get rendered, and that's what we're going to show you here now, is how you actually render these things. So this is an email template that you can send an email alert, and what I did in this template when I built it is I basically wanted to render anything that I thought was value to a customer. So you can see there, this is the same stuff we were talking about when we were talking about the variables, but now we're putting them into practice. So the display name, latest event.display name. the event type, latest event dot event type key, health rule event, latest event dot health rule event, health rule, latest event dot health rule dot name. And I'm going to skip down to display name. And you can see in that one there, we kind of created a sentence. So we said latest event dot display name. So that's going to be the violation at the latest event dot event time. What time did that violation occur? And what was it triggered by? Action dot trigger time. So what time was that actually triggered at? And let's go and show you how these get rendered. So I'm going to go to the next slide here, and we're going to see this exact information, but as it gets rendered by the policy engine in AppDynamics and gets sent out as an email. So you can see here, the display name rendered as ongoing critical health rule violation. The health rule name is AD-games-health rule. This came from the database portion of the AppDynamics platform. So that's why the application name is database monitoring. If this was coming from the APM side, the name of the application would be there in terms of the application name. So this alert is oriented towards the database side of AppDynamics. You can see the latest event message there. AppDynamics has detected a problem with the database server adgames.mysql and violates critical. And one thing that I want to point out here, as AppDynamics users are out there, is that underneath number 1 there, and I'll just kind of point to it with my mouse, this is actually the name of the health rule violation. By default, when you set health rules up in AppDynamics, the default name is like condition 1, condition 2, and it's really important that when you create health rules or that you edit the default health rules, that you actually specify exactly what that health rule means. So when you get an alert, you have something like this that says, AD games, MySQL DB calls per minute. And then you see, the threshold, I set this to 0, so it's really aggressively alerting, but you can see exactly what the violation is when you name your health rule that way. You can see the rest of the rendering down there. The event severity is error. The tier name is AD games, MySQL, which is the database node. And at the very bottom there, that event URL, that's what you would click on to go back into AppDynamics to understand where the violation came from and what was probably causing it. So let's go into another example. This is an example of a webhook template. And again, just to review, base name.infoclass1.infoclass2. There's a bit of text at the very beginning of this that's basically velocity. And really what we're doing is we're cleaning up the message. Some of these messages will have some HTML characters in them and some things that we want to kind of mute out and change to spaces. So you can see there, this is a velocity replace function that's replacing, like the very first one there, it's replacing a comma with a star because I wanted it to look that way. The second one is replacing, the B with a star. And if we go all the way to the bottom one there, it's replacing null with a space. So what we get out of doing this is a real clean payload that gets sent. This can actually be done on the partner side as well, but we can do it on the templating side as well. Again, very similar templating variables that we used in the email alert. And this will, as we go through this presentation, you'll see that we're going to be using, kind of the same ones. They're just rendering different. So latest event.display name of the violation. We'll skip down a few, latest event.healthrule.name. That's the name of the health rule that violated. And that's where we talked about that condition, which was under the number 1 before. Latest event.application.name, latest event.application.id. This is basically the same payload that we had in the email, except for this isn't a webhook. I use a tool called, there's a bunch of them out there. It's called webhook.site. And you can point the AppDynamics to that site, and you can see how the payloads get rendered. And that's what we'll do on the next slide here. So this was sent to webhook.site, and this is the rendering of what came out. This was a sample, so I'll show you that in the demo, how we can run like unit tests to test this out to see what the values are. And this is kind of a test within AppDynamics that you can run, and it's a sample test you can see there. But you can still see all the variables did render. Display name, new critical health rule violation. Event type, health rule. Go down application name, sample application name. So this is the rendering based on the variables that we had in the payload that we sent over to this webhook.site. And again, that site, there's probably a few more of them out there, but it's really used, I really use it to kind of figure out what is being rendered, what has value, and then what do I want to include in my payload when I send my payload out. So that's example of a webhook. So here's kind of an engagement activity. What incident or event management products does your company currently use? And you can just type it into chat. We're just kind of curious what things are out there. And I know for a fact that there's a lot of people that use event management systems. There's a lot of people who have AppDynamics connected to incident systems, and those are very strong integrations, and we'll go through those. Are you currently using any integrations between AppDynamics and a third-party system? And I can see the chat popping up there on my screen here. I saw ServiceNow pop up there, and ServiceNow has built a nice integration for AppDynamics that we'll see in a list here coming up. So if there's anything else you want to add to that, I'll just give a minute here for you to type in, what products you use in terms of event management or ITSM sort of systems. And if you have any integrations out there, and you could have an integration that's using the APIs, it doesn't have to use the webhook. There's all kinds of different ways to use or to build integrations for AppDynamics. I see Snow again, so ServiceNow is a very popular one out there. So let's go on to the next slide, and we're going to get into application examples here and show you like how and talk about how these things are formed. And I'm going to go cover two of these. I'm going to cover PagerDuty and Slack, but all those other ones there, this is just kind of off the top of my head where integrations are built. Like ServiceNow built an integration for AppDynamics, PagerDuty built one, all these vendors on here built one. The one that's not built by a vendor is Jira. That's an in-product AppDynamics integration. The Slack one was actually built by somebody in our community, and if you go look that one up, you'll probably see my name on it. So I built that one. We'll talk about how that one was built. Big Panda, Moogsoft, Splunk, ITSM, those are all event correlation systems. Those are very popular in the marketplace too, because customers are listening to lots of signals from lots of different places, and they like to correlate those signals together. Let's correlate the signal, from some sort of network monitoring with the performance monitoring that AppDynamics provides. So those are very, very common, used in the market, and I see those a lot within our customer base. And Chris can provide the links to all these. The links underneath these here are actually the link to where you can go and study how you put the integration together, how you configure it, how you set it up, all that good kind of stuff. So let's talk about the very first integration, which is Slack. And this is the one that's in our community, and the link is there at the bottom. I don't know that we put the link on that list, Chris, but if you Google it really quick, you can probably get that link and put it in the channel. But that's the link at the bottom there. And what you see here is a nice, pretty alert. This is using a templating language that Slack has called blocks, actually. It's a little bit markdownish if you pull the covers up. But what it allows you to do is have these really pretty buttons. You see the buttons at the bottom. It lets you basically put text in there in a nice format like you see here. And then all the things that are underneath, like underneath application, underneath tier, underneath node, those all come from the templating variables that we talked about in AppDynamics. So we'll go take a look at this template on the next slide. It's only a partial view, but we'll talk about how that template was put together. But they do come out pretty when you use this block language that Slack has. Here is the template. This, again, you can get this template out of the community where that link was I just showed you. And if you take a look at this, we talked about sort of this kind of cleaning up the message by replacing, HTML characters with spaces and stars and that sort of thing. You can see here blocks. This is the block language that Slack has. And, just to kind of tell you the secret of all of this, they have a block editor. So largely that pretty slide that you just saw, I built that using their block editor. And then I took what the block editor gave me and I added context to it for the templating variables for AppDynamics. The first part of this, as I said earlier in the presentation, is velocity can do more than just cast out templating variables and render them with a value. It's got some programmability built into it. You can see the first part of this message here is if, else, if, else. And really what this is doing, it's using the templating variable, and we're trying to check whether it's an error, which will make a red emoji, whether it's a warning, it's going to make a yellow emoji, or if it's near those two, it's going to basically make a green emoji, which is an informational message, which we can do within AppDynamics. If you go down toward the bottom part of it here, you can see this is where the text is being rendered. So you can see that application there with the stars, on either side of it. And then you can see the templating variable, latest event.application.name, latest event.event time, latest event.tier.name. So that's how this template was put together, was using a combination of block language from Slack and the templating variables within AppDynamics. Second example, this one is PagerDuty. Again, start from the pretty and go back to the template. This is a opened up alert within PagerDuty, just a screenshot of it. And this was a sample. You can see it's a sample one there. So this was one of the unit tests that I talked about. So this is what the alert looks like when it enters PagerDuty and you click and you open it. If I go to the next slide here, we're actually going to see the template that PagerDuty built. You can see it's using all the same things that we talked about before. You can see like underneath details there, latest event display name. Again, that's the name of the violation that's occurring, latest event.summary message. That would be a summary of that event. Latest event.id, that would be the ID of the event. So this is a template that actually PagerDuty built. If you go to the links that Chris are providing to the PagerDuty integration, you can copy and paste this template right out of their instructions on how to do this. So that's the PagerDuty example. So kind of in summary, alerting and templating variables are very powerful and allow you to customize an alerting payload, as we just saw with PagerDuty and Slack. Many ISV partners that do event correlation, service incident management, or chat ops have an AppDynamics integration built using webhooks and templating variables. And everyone's going to be custom. So every vendor is going to have a different looking payload for their integration. And sometimes it's specific to the product. It may have specific things in there. If you looked at, we do have the ServiceNow template in there. We don't have that as an example we'll show today, but we can open the template. Theirs is very specific to the way ServiceNow wants to parse that. PagerDuty is the same, and the Slack one, as I talked about, is the same as well. So we do have example payloads in our documentation. We have examples of all those templating variables that I showed you on those earlier slides, and how you look at the info classes and what are the different things in there that you can use. One note I would make is I've seen customers try to do things that are not in the documentation, render things that aren't there, and what's there is what you're allowed to do. So please refer to the documentation if you're going to build one of these. The best practice, if you're trying to learn and understand this, is use the webhook.site, and we'll test, you can test your payload before connecting it to a real application. And lastly, best way to learn this is put your hands on it. Go create a payload, send it to the webhook, send it to the email, understand what you're doing, and you can create something really, really cool if you want. The templates that I showed you during this presentation, especially that email one, and we'll review that email one again. I've shared that with many, many customers as I've showed them, how to do this, as Chris said earlier. So that's kind of it. We're going to jump into the demo, and I'm going to take a drink of water here. And here we are in the AppDynamics user interface. And since we're talking about alerts and response and templating variables, we're going to go right to that area of the product. We talked about earlier how these things are connected. So a health rule, a policy, anomaly detection, and action. We'll go take a look at a few of these. So we'll go take a look at this one here. Sock Shop is one that we're going to take a look at. And if we go look at the health rules for Sock Shop, we can kind of click through them and we can see where things are violating. You guys probably know this about AppDynamics. As you click through these, you'll see where the violations are. We've got some red on this one. We got some yellow, just to show you what's going to be violating on Sock Shop. And we'll see that in the actions that we've created. The policy, so this is the policy for Sock Shop. I'm going to open that up and show it to you. So we'll open it up, and these are the things that are going to trigger an alert. Anything that I have a checkbox next to is going to trigger an alert. I've got all these turned on as well to trigger an alert. The scope of this is on tiers. So I've kind of focused this on tiers. The scope is all the tiers within the application. And then here are the actions that it can trigger when this thing violates. It can trigger an email, a custom email using the custom templating variables, or it can trigger an alert into Slack using that webhook template that we talked about earlier. So let me go. What I'm going to do is I'm going to enable this right now. What that's going to do is when we get to the further part of the demo here, we're going to actually see some real violations. We'll run some sample test ones just to show you how that works. But as we get in and these things start firing off, we'll actually see some real ones in there. So that's for Sock Shop. The other one that we have as part of our demo is database. So we're going to get database alerts from this. And again, this is the way that it's set up. You can see it's very similar. I don't have as many things turned on over here because it's looking at it from a database point of view. I could turn those things on. It wouldn't, it would provide more value probably. But for this demo, I've left them off and I've just focused on health rule violations and slow transactions. The scope is just the database, and the actions that this policy can use are sending the alert to Slack using that template that we showed you earlier, or sending an email out to a custom, actually it goes into a demo Gmail account that we have that we show people when we talk about this stuff. So again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and enable this policy. I have them disabled because they're very aggressively firing alerts, because when you're developing things like this or trying to learn it, you don't want to sit around and wait for alert. You want to kind of get them as fast as you can so you can see what the behavior is. So that's the policy for a database. The other thing I'll show you is the actions. So these are all the actions that are out there under database that were created. And what we're going to do for the next part of the demo is we'll go into email, and then we'll go into HTTP requests. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and open this template. This is an email template, and you saw there was a bunch of them in there. And you can see in here, we're just doing the same thing we did before, as we're using the templating variables. So really the first one is the display name. This is like the name of the violation that occurred, latest event.display name. Event type key. So latest event.event type key. Application.id, application.name. You can see this one is kind of a sentence, latest event at this time, latest event.event time, triggered at this time, action.trigger time. And then at the end here, we can see the summary message, latest event.summary message. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to run that as a test. We can do both tests in webhooks as well as tests on email. So I'm going to go ahead and run a test. This is the test we're going to run, application server restart. Maybe we'll run a couple tests here. Oops, and then we'll go take a look at it. So we should have triggered off 2 application restarts, and there'll be other violations in there since we turned those policies on. So you can see here, there are some real policies in here, or real alerts in here. Here's one from Sock Shop. Here's the application restart that we just sent in. You can see it got sent in twice. And again, it's just using those templating variables. One thing I will note out is you can notice here that health rule event is false. That's the reason this variable is not getting populated. So when you're looking at different things using these templating variables, sometimes you got to read the documentation and make sure what you're doing is the proper thing. I just wanted to point that out. Let's go look at one of the real alerts. Let's look at this one from Sock Shop. We can see very slow transaction. Health rule event is false, so that variable is not being populated, but we can see lots of really good stuff here. The display name, latest event message, the summary message, and we can see the event severity and the tier name that occurred on. So that's example of sending things, and you can see we just got another one in, sending things into email as an alert. This could be your email box. The reason we're doing this is what we use for demos, this Gmail account, so we can send alerts in and see them as demos. So let me go back. We're going to go back to AppDyanmics, and we're going to do the same thing with a payload, a webhook payload, if you will. We're going to look at PagerDuty. I did want to point out, because I saw a lot of snow snuff in there, this is the template for ServiceNow. And you can see it's actually a really large template. I'm not going to read through any of the variables or anything, but it's very specific to how their integration works. Again, using all these velocity or these templating variables, you can see there that they're using those all throughout their payload in here. But let's go back and do what we were going to do, which is looking at PagerDuty. So I'm going to open the PagerDuty one up. The way the PagerDuty integration works and the ServiceNow one works the same way with all that logic they have in that template is they have 2 kind of payloads. They have one that can trigger and one that can resolve. And so this is the one that triggers events in there. And you can see that it's got everything in there that we've talked about. Latest event.display name, latest event.summary message, all those templating variables are in there. So I'm just going to run a test, and we'll go over to PagerDuty, and we will see that in PagerDuty. Let's see, we'll run something that's about one of these. Run test, cancel, and that's Webhook. And this is PagerDuty. Refresh the screen there, and we can see that we have, a triggered event, right? And we can open that up, and this is the same thing you saw on the slides. So we've triggered that test event or that unit test, into PagerDuty, and we can actually go back and resolve that using the resolve function. And so this one's going to carry this keyword resolve. One other thing I'll point out in here, since we're up here, is you can have custom templating variables, but you basically define them up here. A lot of the integrations do that because they need more than what we have in our product to do what they need to do. So you can see this one, this is a variable PD event type resolve. And if we go down and look at the payload, we'll see the PD event type in here for resolve. So what we'll do is we'll again run a test, and we'll say everything's good now. Everything was canceled. We'll run a test, and we'll go back to PagerDuty. My scrolling works, right? We'll go back to PagerDuty, which is the next screen over, and we'll do a refresh again. And we should see that event got resolved. And it was resolved because the issue went away in AppDynamics, and we had it set up to send a payload when things got better, send a payload to PagerDuty and let it go ahead and resolve. So that's the example there. The next example that we are going to go through is the Slack example. So we'll go back over here to our templates, and we've got this one here that we're going to look at. This is the Slack one. This is kind of what I showed you in the slide, right? We talked about the logic using velocity, using the templating variables to kind of drive the behavior of the emojis. So we'll show you that. We'll send one over with a yellow and one with a red. There's probably a bunch of red ones in there already. So we'll do that as part of the demo. So let's go ahead and we will run a test, and let's pick something in here that's a warning. Let's see, that's the first one's a warning. So we'll run one with a warning, and there's probably already going to be one in there that's red, but we'll go ahead and force one in from this test mechanism. Okay. And now let's go take a look, scroll all the way over to Slack. And what you see here, I'll go all the way to the bottom. We see a bunch of real alerts in here, and we'll take a look at those. But we had alerts coming in since we started the session. So as you can see here, here's the sample one we just sent in, and here's the sample one that was a warning. You can see, how I was talking about the logic and the velocity templating language. You can use it to drive different behaviors on your output. And I know in that ServiceNow template, they do something very similar in terms of the logic. So you can see this one was a warning. You can see this one. This is the test one we ran. This one was critical, so it's red. And again, these fancy buttons in here, I put these buttons in here. This actually will go back to AppDynamics to where that deep link is. And this is just wired up to go start a WebEx session if you want to, do a conference bridge. Let's take a look at some of the other ones that are in here. Here's one that's an IO exception. Server returned a bad, 500. And this came from SockShop. So they're piling in there. Look at that. So this came from SockShop. We can see the application. What tier did that come from? What node was that on? When did it occur? What was the severity? Who triggered it? So this is the action that was triggered. Here's a longer error that's in there, and you can see this is the latest event summary message that we talked about with the templating variables. You can see how much longer this one is, and you can see some of the problems there. And again, this occurred on a different tier, carts, a different node, carts-1, and it just occurred right behind the one that we had there. So that is, I think, what we wanted to cover as far as going through the demo. Chris, I'm going to go ahead and go back to the slides.
I just wanted to take a moment. Are there any other questions or any extra documentation you guys are looking for? And then also for everybody here, there's a process called call a consultant. So if you don't have an account team that you can talk to regularly, or if you don't already have an assigned CSS, a customer success specialist, then you can always request it through the call a consultant. So you'd go in through support and you would go through the call a consultant process instead of finishing the support process and actually putting a ticket in for support. You would get one of us customer success engineers to come and sit with you and kind of look at what you're working on and see if we can make a recommendation on it. Thank you all for your questions. It helps everybody. Now, this is meant for enablement. We want you guys to be successful with the products that you purchase from Cisco. Observability is a massive space, very difficult to get going sometimes. If you need some help, put in a call a consultant request, email your CSS, or get with your account team, reach out to us. We will be more than happy to go through an accelerator or working session with you guys. But now, say that you're wanting to set up for a certification test and you're wanting to start, getting those badges under your name and certifications under your belt, build up your resume, whether you're a customer already or just an individual in observability that's wanting to better your skills. Definitely check out the Cisco University. There's a lot of on-demand and instructor-led courses for both, or not only Splunk AppDynamics, but things that we have beyond that. As Cisco is massive into network security, data centers, and the infrastructure within those. We're heavy into AI. So definitely check out everything that there is to offer on there. If you're already a customer, you already have a free account. All those on-demand courses are already free and ready for you to use. If you're not a customer already, I'm sure there's plans and offerings that you can jump into pretty quickly. Beyond that, if you're interested in more of what we have and the content that we create, check us out on youtube.com at Cisco Observability. I gave that link out earlier in the chat, but we will most definitely be posting it again. Let me grab that for you. Or if Drew or Calvin could, one of our awesome panelists that have been here helping along the way. Thank you to both of you. And excellent job, Bill. Now, the content that we create, we post up, including this recorded session, will be up on our YouTube page. There's playlists, there's short videos, there's long videos, there's live events, there's premieres. Check us out, get active in the community. Thank you, everybody, for joining, and we'll see you next time.